Absolutely. Well, speaking of Flux, I suppose there's another one. I'm going to let you lead this one because you had some interesting points on it. But I guess Tidelift, who a company I'm
Yes.
not familiar with, has a new study talking about open source and how it's maintained. So why don't you tee that one up?
Yeah, so I find Tidelift, they're an interesting little company founded by former Red Hat executives. Of course, Red Hat has been the voice of enterprise open source for a long time. So these people come from that background, and they realized that when you look at the open source world, that a lot of these projects are not maintained, including projects that are being used in enterprise software or being used by large enterprise IT organizations to handle important automation or other technical tasks. So they created this company where they basically said, we'll find these projects that don't have maintainers and we will show that these opportunities are available, and then we can find maintainers for them. Or if you're already maintaining a project and not getting paid for it, maybe we can get you paid by the people who are actually depending on this little piece of technology to work. So, anyways, that's the company. And they do this report every year on the state of the open source maintainer, basically showing what are hundreds of maintainers actually doing in their day-to-day lives. And as you might expect, this report shows that the majority of maintainers are not being paid for their work, including for open source projects that are currently being used to support enterprise grade work. So you might think that's a problem if these pieces are dependent on people who are doing this for fun and have no contractual uh, actual need to support this, and no skin in the game in actually making sure this gets done other than for their own personal self-interest.
Well, when I looked at this, my big takeaway is this is why I've never been a big fan of open source, and why I think, in fact, most CIOs don't actually use true open source, right? They use Red Hat, right? They use something where it's like it's open source, but it's a
With
paid
corporate
engagement for
maintainers. Yeah.
support. Yeah, for this very reason. Now, so to me, I look at this and it was sort of a. I actually didn't. I appreciate the background. I didn't understand that's what Tidelift was all about. So that's kind of interesting. But I look at this and from a core enterprise perspective, like, okay, whatever. I mean, it solidifies what I've long said. It's like you should never be doing true open source in a production environment. What is more interesting from my perspective, and we've talked about this in the past with a couple of different incidents, is it's the open source that sits in sort of the public internet and a lot of the like core parts of this really deep underlying infrastructure
Mhm.
that's where I think some of these impact. So it's not like within the bounds, the walls of an enterprise, but the stuff that the enterprise inadvertently or almost subconsciously is reliant on could be vulnerable to this. And I think this may actually lead to some upswell in how do we address this. So it's interesting from that perspective, but definitely questions that if you're a CIO, you should be at least aware of and be asking.
Yeah, and I think that's the big issue here. I think simply being able to ask that question and having that bill of materials for every piece of software that you're using in your organization, and knowing that you are not either leaving your software to be broken or to be hacked. Uh, because do you really know who is maintaining that open source component that you're reliant on? There's a lot of doors that open doors potentially into your organization that you're not even considering if you haven't done this type of audit. And I'm not saying this would be easy to do, because honestly, there's a lot of unmanaged open source that is just hiding there, and that is hard to even detect in the first place.